Is doping a bigger crime than sexual abuse? Well, you'd think so if you look at the preventive initiatives and structures in place to catch the criminals in doping compared to sexual abuse in sports. This was all made very clear to us recently with the explosion of the US Gymnastics scandal, where it turned out that ignored claims of sexual abuse had resulted in a US national team osteopath for years and years getting away with sexually abusing hundreds of the very gymnasts he was hired and supposed to serve as part of the staff. Out in the trenches to try and change this is a dedicated advocate for champion women that you're about to meet today. Nancy Hogshead-Makar is a triple Olympic gold medalist in swimming, nothing less, who decided to go to law school when retiring from her 800 laps a day training regime. Over the past year, she's been going through a similar in effort regime to try and push through the Safe Sport Act to empower tons of women in sports. In this interview, you will hear her story, and you'll also understand maybe why I'm tempted to claim that she was unknowingly passed the torch for women in sports by her own role model and hero back in the days. Let's meet Nancy for an update on the issues that women face in sports in 2018. Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation to come and tell us all about what you do for women in sports.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I appreciate this opportunity, Anja.
You are yourself a champion woman with, is it 3 Olympic gold medals, and I think there's a silver in there as well. And you've been for 8 years at world-class level in swimming back in the days. When you stopped swimming, did you already have plans for what you wanted to do afterwards?
I did. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't know what that would look like or what I'd be good at or whatnot. I think when I finished my swimming career at age 22, in many ways, as compared with my peers, I was way behind the 8 ball. In terms of, their professional careers, they'd already had several jobs, and I'd never had a job, right? So I just focused on swimming and academics. That was hard to find something else that when you've been so good at something, and I wanted to be that good at something else. But number 2 is like, what's worth it, right? Swimming and training for any sport is really hard. Hard. I can't stress that enough. It took all of me. I could not have given any more, but it's just like to pull your hair out kind of. We swam 800 laps a day. We swam 400 in the morning and 400 at night. And we did another, we lifted weights and we ran on top of that. I mean, on average, I was working out between 5 and 6, maybe even 7 hours a day. So, and it's painful, right? But to me, being the best in the world as an athlete was worth it. And that's what I wanted, right? Yeah. So what profession is worth it? What professionally did I want to do that was worth really giving myself over to? And that's a harder question to answer. When I look at different kinds of law, before I used to work at a big law firm, and I did timber harvesting cases, I did medical malpractice cases, I did all kinds of cases. And I mean, when I was doing timber harvesting cases, like I really didn't care who won, who lost. I was like, this is what I'm going to do for my life. And some people, they just ate it up with a spoon. They thought this was the great, and we did. We had a phenomenal client who was getting ripped off, and I got it. But clearly, biggest difference that I can make in my legal career is to make sure that women have opportunities, that they're safe opportunities, and that, if they're pregnant, that they're able to continue on with those athletic opportunities. If they're gay or lesbian or transgender, that they're able to participate in athletics. I'm a big believer in athletics, and so I use my legal talents and hard work to make sure that there are more of those. And that women really get to enjoy the fruits of being able to give themselves over to a sport.
How come you transitioned into defending the rights of women in athletics and sports?
Gender just always interested me. When I was swimming, I was very, very muscular. And today you look at me and I would call myself, I gender conform. Like nobody has any doubt that I'm female or don't sound. But when I was young, when I was training, I would be going into the bathroom and people would say, hey, that's says women. I'm a girl. This was like started happening like at 12, 13 years old. And, and I had to really, I mean, at a pretty young age, like 15 years old, I had to have conversations with my coaches about like, they can't get mad at the guys because I beat them, because we're all going for the same thing. We're teammates. We're trying to be the best athletes that we possibly can. And it can't be a dig on their masculinity. So to my coach's credit, as soon as I kind of had that talk with them, they listened and they didn't again. So I've always sort of been interested in gender. I was at the Olympics in 1984, and my hero, Donna Deverona, at the time, Donna still came and talked to the whole Olympic team. And she said, I hope that when you have a microphone in front of your face, I hope that you'll use about this great statute called Title IX. It's a education law, right? So it says that schools can't discriminate against students when it comes to their sex in education. Sports is a part of somebody's education, so that was covered under the law. But it also applies to sexual harassment and assault, pregnancy and parenting students. It applies to equal access to an English class or a math class. It applies to equal ability to be able to get into a school, you name it. It sort of applies across the board.
And this statute was like, it's 45 years old, something like that.
45 years old? Yeah. And I realized that if it had not been in the United States for that statute, Title IX, that I would not have had a college scholarship. I would not be where I was right then. I would not have had an opportunity to participate in the Olympics. And I really owed a lot to that statute. And at that time, it was in peril. There was a bad Supreme Court ruling. And so I got up to speed just enough, like literally that much, that I could talk about it in front of the media. And then I went on the board of the Women's Sports Foundation and, sort of have gone ever since then. I just opened up Champion Women about 4 years ago.
Is it right that it changed like the picture totally for how many women were actually doing sports? I thought there was something like 1 in 27 of women would do sports, and then it changed to 1 in 3.
Yeah, good memory. Yeah. No, it has changed the landscape, and in sports in particular, girls went from a couple 100,000 girls playing high school sports, and now they're up to about 3.2 million girls playing high school sports. And most of those gains happened right away. There's still a big gap in between what girls and boys have. Boys still have about 1.3 million more opportunities. It's very frustrating. But really, the gains have been phenomenal. But it's not just in athletics. It's also been a huge boon to the country in terms of having a healthier workforce, right? People who participate in sports have a lifelong healthier trajectory. Athletes are much more likely to be in the workforce, to be working full time. Right. So it has all these other benefits to everybody in society to have a large population. Look, if it was up to me, if I could wave a magic wand, most athletic departments in the country double for both boys and girls.
And what are the inequalities that are today, 2018?
Yeah, 2018 there's still a big gap between what men and women get. It's a lot harder actually to get to equality. That's something that Champion Women's really working on. So we have a campaign right now where we send letters to the top schools in the country saying, here's how many athletes that you need to add, here's how much scholarship dollars you need to add, here's how many recruiting dollars you need to add. And here are all the ways that you're not treating men and women equally. Everybody can find out that information. It's on a publicly available website. If you just type in EADA, 4 letters, EADA into your Google search bar, it'll come right up. It's the Equity and Athletics Disclosure Act. Everybody can find out that information.
I believe you've been very involved with everything about the sexual harassment in women's gymnastics, and before that, even with Stories in swimming. So where are we with that
sexual
now?
Assault. So this is something I've been doing for about 8 years. Champion Women took it on really hard when we opened, and but for 8 years I've been really working on the difference between the amount of legal protections that are there for club and Olympic athletes as opposed to legal protections that are there for students who are in school. So school-based sports is night and day on how much protection that they have from sexual abuse, sexual harassment, the incentives that there are to educate and to make sure that kids know what appropriate boundaries are between adults and children, to make sure that, it's just, there's just as one simple example, schools have licensing. So teachers have got to have a license and they can lose it pretty quick. They're found at anything to do with sexual abuse. There's no licensing with coaches who are in club sports. And it's really hard to get kicked out of those sports. You just have very powerful people within sport, and the national governing body just has no incentive to get that person out. Larry Nassar was very charming, and he convinced a lot of people that what he was doing was perfectly normal. This is, he rationalized what he was doing. And because he had the power and because he was the national team coach, it also allowed him to prey on a lot more women. But I think most people before the Me Too movement really thought, they understood that sexual harassment and sexual assault happened, but they didn't realize just how ubiquitous it was. So we've been doing a couple things. One is that we've been pushing for, and now we're getting this new, it's called the United States Center for Safe Sport. And it has now passed the House and the Senate. So now it just has to, either the president either won't sign it, it'll become law, or he'll veto it, or he'll sign it. So one of those three options, but we're hoping that, it does become law of the land. But it authorizes this US Center for Safe Sport, which is responsible for educating the Olympic movement, it's about 8 million children. This is not a small bill here. This will have major impacts for most of the people that live in America. They are going to be responsible for education. They're going to be responsible for taking complaints by coaches or people in authority, for doing investigations, and for getting molesters out of sport. So it's an independent group too, right? So imagine, we had to have independence when it came to the drug issue, right, of doping. So there had to be USADA, United States Anti-Doping Agency. Mm-hmm. And there's just no way that you would have gotten Lance Armstrong, the cycling guy, out of cycling if it had been left to United States Cycling, because he's their moneymaker. He's the one who's bringing in all the cash. So it's just not going to happen.
Do you think that not believing is the main reason why this abuse could go on and on to such an extent? Or do you think it's more about not wanting to believe?
That's a good question. I think it's some of both. It's really easy to say that it's really just not a big deal, right? Women can just slough it off. And I didn't hear any, wow, how horrible that happened to you. I didn't hear any of that. Did you?
No, and I even think that the girls, they didn't even get a phone call from the association. They're like, are you okay? Is there anything we can do? I think there was just silence completely, right?
Right. Yeah, to not have, so Scott Blackman is the guy who's head of the United States Olympic Committee, to not be out there and being protective and to being emotionally supportive of his athletes is really unconscionable. I can't imagine what could be keeping him off the phone all day, particularly the people that are on the Olympic team that he has made a lot of money off of. This impulse, this knee-jerk reaction to protect the institution's interests instead of people's interests is really important. My new hero is Rachel Den Hollander. She was the first woman to come forward. She even talks about how in the Christian church, they're really good about taking away personal sin, when you do something wrong, about being forgiven and, God loves you. But they don't really talk that much about when you're the victim of it, right? You really have to sort of search for where to go, because this sort of knee-jerk reaction of you got to forgive, and you got to be a survivor, and you can't be a victim for long. I really think people have their own trajectory for how it is that they're going to be healing. And I do think 1,000% healing is 1,000% possible. But, it's just like any other cut or wound or any kind of trauma that somebody has, or grief when somebody dies, that it is a process of going through it and really honoring that process. I think we saw a lot of the women who really were very broken, but you could also tell that honestly, that they sort of had enough inner strength there that you kind of knew they were going to get through this.
Maybe also because as an athlete, you're kind of cultivating this mindset to never be a victim. You're always thinking about what can you do about the situation, and the last thing you want to be is a victim. You're a warrior. So probably it's been a release for them to finally find out that they're victims and that now they get a chance to heal.
I mean, it's a really unique experience for a victim to be surrounded by 140 other victims, or 152. So I think that's how many ultimately testified the first week, and I don't know how many. I think it's like another 100 the second week. But that is a really unique opportunity to get to speak about it in a public forum and have thousands and thousands of people watch and validate what happened, but also just to be in a community, in a circle where nobody's telling you not to cry. Nobody's telling you just get over it. Nobody's telling you people are about as happy as they make up their mind to be, right? That they have a little space that they can be broken together, knowing that they're going to be just fine. They're going to heal.
You can imagine that if you're a mom out there or a dad and you have a little girl who's crazy about doing sports, that they will maybe be a little more alert and maybe even paranoid. Now, what can we do for that not to happen? Because we still want our girls out there, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you want to look for a gym, or look for a pool, or look for a field or tennis court or whatever that has a safe sport policy. And you want to make sure that the powers that be, not only do they have the policy, but they embrace the policy, that they're not poo-pooing the policy like, oh, we have to do this for safe sport because somebody's making us do this, and we don't really want to, right? Right. So that's what you want. You want somebody who says, we really take this very seriously here, right? It gives them that opportunity to lay down the rules that'll sort of immunize them as much as you can for the rest of their athletic career as they move on into their teens and 20s and maybe even 30s. Okay, what are the best ways that we can not scare the poop out of little kids and have them still be safe, right? We don't want them to walk around being scared. So how do we talk to them? How do we talk to the adults? How do we make the environment safe for everybody? And youth sports in general, and I'm talking like, the 6 and unders, 8 and unders, 10 and unders, I think they have a special responsibility to set athletes up for the rest of their life as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate for a coach to be like with them. So here's what I want the coach, the captain of the team, the parent who's there all the time, the owner of the club. I want them to stand up together and all be in accord and have the coach say, listen, let me tell you about a good coach and an ethical coach. And a good coach will never text just you. A good coach will never be alone with just you, right? So you want them to embrace it, that they can set a child up to be safe for the rest of their lives.
But a good coach can give a hug.
Yeah, a good coach can give a hug. What's what I want the coach to say? I might want to give you a hug after you have a really great performance, but if you don't want it, it is your choice and it's your body. You can always say no, and you won't hurt my feelings. It's fine, okay? Yeah, one of the things that the act, I don't want to go before saying that one of the things that the act requires is that everybody within the Olympic movement, so this means parents and volunteers and officials and administrators and club owners and coaches are all mandatory reporters. And they can all get jail time if they don't report within 24 hours, as long as they have a reasonable suspicion. They don't have to do an investigation. You leave that up to the police or the FBI or to the child services program. Report to any one of those three. You leave it up to them to go do the investigation. You don't want to interview a child a lot of times. As soon as they tell, you want to go right to the people who know how to do this, right? Who know how to run an investigation. I mean, it's kind of sad, but a sexually abused child typically has to go to 7 adults and disclose 7 different times before they're believed. Let's get that down, right? The first time you hear something, don't poo-poo it. Get on it right away.
But also you don't want to get all down on someone who's just a good coach and there was some misunderstanding. What are the chances of them to prove their innocence and not having to clean themselves
Sure.
for something they never did.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's important for all coaches to know that within the US Olympic movement, what the national governing body or what Safe Sport has to do is, in order to be able to kick them out, is they have to give them due process, which includes they have to have notice, they have to have a hearing, they have to see all the evidence. Them. They have to be able to ask questions of the witness. They have to be able to, right? They are entitled to a hearing as to whether or not it happened or not. They may not result that happened, but hopefully they'll think that the process is fair to all parties. You know, either the national governing body or the United States Olympic Committee or U.S. Center for Safe Sport cannot just go and say, oh, we've heard bad things about you. You're kicked out. They can't do that. They have to have an investigation. They have to hold a hearing before they could do that. But they can't do that.
Another issue that you may be dealing with in Champion Women is leaders in sport.
Sure. Yeah, right. That's one of the things that the International Olympic Committee could really make a big difference on, because when it comes to leadership, like positions, international federations or national Olympic committees, there's a big gap in men and women. And we know that when there's men and women together, we know that better decisions come out of that.
What can you do as an association to help more women find their place in sports?
Yeah, there are two organizations that kind of do that. What we do is we provide legal advocacy for girls and women in sports, right? So a perfect thing with us is this statute that just passed. That's right up our alley. Like explaining to schools how they're out of compliance with the federal law, Title IX, that's right up our alley. There's two organizations that I recommend. One is called the Alliance for Women Coaches, and I also recommend Women Leaders in College Athletics. And they both do a lot to promote individual women and to make sure there's a good database for women to get hired in either coaching or administrating roles. It takes a team. It takes a lot of us to tackle the issues of women in sports.
And do you use any of your athletic talents or any of the lessons that swimming gave you in your work today?
Oh, every day. Absolutely. Yeah. It's hard work. And I mean, just in the past month with getting this bill passed, it's been a rare day that I've gotten 8 hours of sleep, or that I've even gotten 6 hours. It's been, it's been a lot of travel, and I leave tomorrow again to go up to Washington, D.C. We've got to get money to be able to fund Safe Sport, right? But it's 1,000% worth it. I could not be happier doing what I'm doing, and that's what you want.
Yes, and I'm sure a lot of us thinking that it's 100% worth it what you're doing. So thank you so much for helping women in sports, so that we can keep getting these athlete stories and be inspired by all these women out there and have role models for ourselves, right?
That's right. That's right. That's an aspect I didn't even bring up, but absolutely, it's a whole nother thing. I love watching the Olympics. Love it.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy.
Okay.
Stay in touch.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.